Our phenomenal executive director, Christina Swarns, and also want to thank Carlita Salazar and Shauna Kennedy for all of their help putting tonight together. So thank you. We also want to thank Kai Wright and all of the colleagues at WNYC that made tonight possible, and our wonderful hosts here at the Greene Space. So thank you as well to the Greene Space and to WNYC. And of course, we especially want to thank Raymond and Kevin, who will be joining us in just a moment. So, I thought I would just start my remarks by, just sharing that I came of age here in New York during this time. I remember the case vividly. And, it was just obviously an incredibly seminal case, but what I remember so vividly, and I am, by the way, the same age as Raymond and Kevin, is just the prevailing notion that they were guilty, and that was everywhere. Their guilt was almost completely unquestioned in the mainstream media. There were a few, exceptions. Through just incredible racist dog whistling, uncritically referring to them, and you heard them just describe this as a wolf pack, and the victim as prey. The late New York Times reporter Jim Dwyer, reflecting on the case, had this to say: "I look back at the jogger case and I wish I had been more skeptical. As a journalist, a lot of people didn't do their jobs. Reporters, police, prosecutors, defense lawyers. This was a proxy war being fought, and these young men were a proxy for all kinds of other agendas, and the truth and reality and justice were not a part of it." End quote. And of course, politicians decrying an under-policed city feasted on this news cycle. Sound familiar? Then Mayor Koch, when describing their pretrial status, had this to say: "We always have to say alleged because that's the requirement." And then he went on to refer to these young men as monsters. So what has changed since then? Would 5 children of color still be facing these kinds of charges, and would they be wrongfully convicted? And I have had the honor of collaborating with Kevin, Raymond, and other members of the Exonerated Five for a number of years now on a set of policy reforms here in New York State, and we have made some gains. You heard the description of the recording of interrogation law that was made effective here in New York State in 2018. So this really required that law enforcement record the custodial interrogation from start to finish, not just that carefully packaged confession that you hear at the end, which, by the way, you saw in the Central Park 5 documentary. You just see this packaged confession. We want to see what transpired leading up to that confession. What were the techniques law enforcement used? What were the pressures on that person? And the legal system only judges whether or not a confession is voluntary when they determine whether or not it can be admitted into court, not whether or not it's reliable. Right? And what was so striking about the Central Park 5 documentary was listening to one of the jurors who said that, he saw that their statements weren't even lining up. And he was, frankly, probably the most critical thinker on the jury. And by the end, he felt so browbeaten and pressured into convicting that that's what he did. So it is that much more important, right, that we record interrogations from start to finish. That really has been accomplished here in New York. However, that law still has problems, right? There are exceptions, allowable exceptions in that law. For instance, if there's an equipment malfunction, right, or someone spontaneously blurts out a confession, I don't know when that happens. But all of these exceptions that law enforcement can use to not record an interrogation. And obviously, there's more work to be done just on that law. But we've also kind of turned to a second generation of reforms relating to the confession phenomenon, the false confession phenomenon. And you heard, I believe it was Kevin just talking about what's called the Reed technique. This is a technique that's employed by law enforcement that really is guilt presumptive, right? It assumes the person they're interviewing is guilty, and therefore the whole goal is just to extract that confession. And they can use all sorts of techniques, including lying. That was actually done in this case. Youssef, when he was being interrogated, was told that there was a fingerprint found on the victim's clothing that matched to him. That was actually completely false, not true at all. So law enforcement can lie about the presence of evidence that doesn't exist. They can also lie about the consequences, right? They can tell somebody, you'll be treated in family court if you just confess to this crime, not in criminal court, and you'll face less time. So we're looking to change that law too, right? We're trying to pass a law that says police cannot use deception during interrogations anymore. It's incredibly coercive. We're also taking a look at the length of interrogations, right? You heard that the Exonerated Five were interrogated for between 14 and 30 hours. anyone would be just broken down at that point. These were children. But of course, no one, adults or children, should be going through that. So that's another area that we're looking at in the New York law. And of course, still to this day in New York State, there is no right to counsel for young people. They can ask for a lawyer, but how many kids know to ask for a lawyer, right? So we want that as of right, that someone should just be able to ask for a lawyer and get one. It's so critically important. So, and then finally, a cousin of the false confession is the false guilty plea, right? We know from the nation's exonerations, and there are more than 3,000 that have been demonstrated since 1989, that 20% of those people pled guilty to crimes they didn't commit. And here in New York State, there was a horrible court decision just a few years ago that said that if you pled guilty, you cannot get back into court to prove your innocence if there's no DNA in your case. And that's, of course, a lion's share of people who are convicted. So they have no opportunity to get back into court. So that's another law that we're seeking to pass this year called the Challenging Wrongful Conviction Act. And so I would just say that, Raymond and Kevin have been so instrumental in this fight for justice here in New York State. Frankly, the recording law just would never have happened without their advocacy. I would just love to invite them both to the stage right now to just hear more from them. And so we're going to turn to all of you in a couple of minutes for your questions, so begin preparing them. But for now, I'm going to turn first to Raymond and then to Kevin, just to kind of hear your reflections a little bit about, the state of the criminal legal process then and now.
I mean, we just was talking about that, right?
Yep.
30 years later. And so to see, not much has changed, to see that a system that still operates on punishment and not rehabilitation, to see the budgets that's poured into the system on the backs of roughly 75,000, inmates, it says a lot. It says that at the end of the day that you can put out an emotional cry and people will respond, and it'll make people turn their backs, and once they turn their backs, you can get away and do whatever you want. And so I think that we have to look at this system. It still operates at a fast pace, and it's been ahead for a long time, and it's very complex. There isn't one solution. It has to be multiple solutions. And so we always ask people to come and bring those solutions to the table because we need to hear all possible ideas, right? So it's always a call to arms. It's always a call that we ask people to come on and get involved. And it doesn't matter, nationality, race, creed, sexual orientation. It doesn't matter because the system needs somebody to occupy a spot. It needs somebody to sit in that jail cell. And they'd rather have our youth sit in the jail cell than actually occupy a college dorm. And so for me, it's I know it's a long answer, but it's 30 years, and to still see the same tactics are being used, the Reed technique, to see that we get pushed back when we try to push bills, right? It's through the work of the Innocence Project that we was able to get the bills passed where, the interrogations are recorded fully so that people can see the whole process, not just see Raymond say, hey, Kevin's guilty, Kevin did it, but understand that it took 15 to 30 hours to get me to that point, right? And so to me, the system, it hasn't changed. And I think that the first step is that it has to operate from a mode of punishment to a mode of rehabilitation. And once it does that, then we can start to make some headway. But until then, we're not.
Yeah, just to piggyback. Good evening.
Yeah, how about that, right?
Yeah, it has been a journey. And to physically be here, it's a blessing within itself.
Yeah.
But justice delayed is justice denied. We're still fighting. And then, like I just mentioned, we're in our late 40s. And we've been fighting for almost our whole life, since 14 years old. And we're here. And I remember back in 1989, when we were screaming to the top of our lungs that we were innocent, but our roars was like whispers to the world. We felt like nobody was listening, So it has been a journey, but because of everything that we've been through and because being with the Innocence Project and teaming up, it has gave us that platform. And now we must use this platform to raise awareness because there's still people out there that need to be aware of what's going on.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's just so extraordinary, too, that, you know, I think so many people understandably would just say, you know what, I'm going to move on with my life. And the fact that you've given back over and over and over so that, you know, other people don't go through the same thing is beautiful. And we thank you so much for that.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you.
So we'd like to turn to all of you now and hear some of your questions. So I know that we're going to get a little help.
Oh, you got something in your hands?
Got some hands? Great.
Hello.
Hello.
So I actually am an NYU student right now studying policy, very specifically to work in ending mass incarceration. And one of the conversations that we have a lot is, you know, holding prosecutors accountable, holding law enforcement accountable, because there's so much immunity there. And one thing that I feel desperately wanting to change is being able to hold law enforcement accountable. What kind of conversations or even things that you have working right now on that are working towards that in any way, or is that even something that's on the table, is being able to hold prosecutors accountable for their misconduct that leads to wrongful conviction, things like withholding evidence and so on?
Yeah. No, I mean, that's very big on our plate. I mean, Rebecca could speak to that, because when we have these ideas, this is who we go to. Like, you know, we're like, we want to do this. And she's like, all right, let's figure it out. You know, so we go to them because they're the anchor here. And so, but definitely for us to see Linda Fairstein, Elizabeth Lederer, right? Fairstein goes on and she writes several novels, and she's kind of like the hidden voice on Law and Order, right? And to be put on this platform. And people forget that she sent 5 innocent boys to prison and didn't think a wink of it, right? And then not only her, but the police officers, right? We go through over 100 depositions, and there's officers who have conspiracy cases pending. And they're in the deposition testifying that they're decorated officers. Detective Arroyo, who's in my case, they find a guy who's dead in the car. There's $30,000 in the trunk. They take it and they split it. Right? And the rookie is the one who turns them in. So you know, that's something that's definitely at the top of the list that we have to look at, immunity, and take that away.
Yeah, it's definitely, and the key word you said was accountability. We need to hold people accountable from the top positions down to the last. And that's what happened in 1989. There was no accountability. People got away with, quote unquote, murder, you know, and it's bad that these things happen. And I remember when I lost trial, the prosecutors was popping champagne like they won a championship, where our lives was put, you know, sent to 5 to 10 years, 5 to 15 years, and we thought we would never be home again. On the other end, these people were living their best life. So we must change that dynamic and change the unjust system.
Yeah, I mean, there's no question. And, you know, even in the wake of George Floyd's murder, you know, Congress was unable to pass, you know, what would have eliminated qualified immunity for police. And so that really is a fight that's now turned to the states. I will say New York State became the first state to create an independent commission on prosecutor misconduct. That is still being populated, right? We don't even know the composition of that group yet, but we're hopeful after it was, by the way, legally challenged by the DA's Association here in New York. So that will be, you know, the first effort, national effort to have an independent commission. So we'll definitely, you know, keep our eyes on that. And just one other amazing thing that did happen recently on the policy front was the elimination of, there was a law that was called 50A, which basically effectively allowed police disciplinary records to remain entirely secret. And that was the case for 40 years. And in the wake of George Floyd's murder, that law was repealed. And so for the first time, we do have access to those records. And in fact, we actually looked at some of the primary detectives in your cases. In your case,
Yeah.
they had extensive disciplinary histories. I mean, these were not people that should have been on the force at all. And so, you know, obviously a foundational reform when it comes to police accountability is just having access to police disciplinary records. Of course, now we have to go further, right, and demand accountability, you know, in the face of that information.
Good evening. I wanted to ask how you, first of all, how did you maintain your spirit and strength and hope over those years? And how did you connect to the Innocence Project? And then at the Innocence Project, how do you determine which cases you're going to accept, given there are just so many others in this situation? So again, how did you not lose hope? How did you, such that you wanted to connect with them and the belief that they could help you, and your selection process?
Yeah, that's a great question. People often ask that, how did you get through it? And we had this strength within us. We just did it. You know, and it's a word I use a lot, is resilience. That even from such a young age, we had that resilience within us to keep fighting. And that's why I mentioned that growing up in Harlem, New York City, I seen people fighting for justice even before I knew what it was. I seen stop and frisk before it was labeled that in the 80s. And I grew up in the 80s when it was hard. You know, and one thing for me, my family, my mother, my sisters, which 3 of them are here today, you know, since that time, that I had them to show to me, in a sense, you know. But it was hard, especially in the 80s back when we had yellow pages. Some of y'all might be young, but I remember people used to call my mother's house and say, your son need to be castrated and hang up. Or the other 4 should be horsewhipped in Century Park, while the eldest, Corey Wise, should be hung from a tree. So those things that's kept us keep fighting, you know. And people often ask me, like, wow, you know, you people are iconic for what you did. But all we knew was to fight, you know. But I know I had my family with me the whole time, and it was hard. The ordeal was hard. You know, people might see me and Raymond, you know, very polished, but we have these indelible scars. We have these scars that we have been through all these years, and it's been 30+ years. If you do the math, that's a long time to be dealing with this, but we're here.
Still. Yeah. And the Twitter piece, after Exoneration, I heard about the Innocence Project, and I reached out, and it was Matt. It was a guy named Matt at the time, and he said, "You never been to the project?" And I was like, "No." And he was like, "Well, come on down." And so I came down to the project just to get a tour, and I met a woman by the name of Liz Webster.
Yeah.
Right? And Liz said, "Hey, you ever did any speaking?" And I said, "Not really, but I'm interested." She said, "We get a ton of stuff through here. Maybe I'll funnel some stuff to you and get you to start speaking." And boy, whew, that was, I ain't stopped since, right?
For sure, yeah.
But Twitter became the tool that we, you know, that got us to the Innocence Project, also became the tool that got us to AVA. It also became a tool that we used when this was a no-pay case and Mayor Bloomberg was on his 3rd term, and he wasn't trying to settle, so we had to use Twitter.
Yeah, and the Innocence Project always been around.
Always.
Even in 1989, when we was fighting that case, they were there. They was right there in the trenches with us. So it was just perfect when we teamed up with the Innocence Project. It was natural to do so.
Yeah.
Because we was fighting for the same cause, and we still are.
Yeah.
And just to answer your other question, we have an intake department, a phenomenal intake department, who, you know, reads through all of the letters that come in, which are endless. And, you know, obviously there are way too many cases for us to handle alone. We do work with a network of innocence organizations around the country. So there are more than 55 domestic innocence organizations throughout the nation. So for instance, states like Texas and California have 3 innocence organizations each. And so, you know, we're really seeing, you know, that network grow and blossom. But I will say, you know, our intake staff is not to be beat. They're incredible. They're reading, you know, these horrendous, you know, letters all day long and really going deep into, you know, case selection. But really, if we believe that there is any chance that somebody is innocent, you know, that is a case that we'll take on. But of course, we have an incredible backlog. We have made huge strides in reducing it, but there are just, the volume of the system is insane. When you think about, in the 70s, we had 200,000 people behind bars, and now over 2 million. All the while, violent crime has gone down.
I'm a retired police officer, and we got to start with the basis. When they team you up with a partner, you got to let your partner know, first of all, if you didn't see it, you don't know what happened, then you've got to take precaution to that. I started out as a transit cop with Eric Adams, and I worked together. If I didn't see you jump the turnstile, I'm not writing you. But if I clearly saw you, I will write you. And you let your partner know that. We had too many summons issue where we had tokens at that time, and people would say, no, but I paid my fare. No, I saw you come through the gate. If you didn't see that, why are you writing it? And I let my partner know. Did you see him come through the gate? Then if you didn't, you're not writing him. If you're not sure and you're questioning yourself, don't write him. So you got to start with the basis. You got to start in the academy. Don't bring no false arrests in here. And you as an individual, me being an Afro-American in the precinct, I have to also watch my back. 113 precinct, it was 2 female black officers. This was in the paper. And they were doing the right thing. You know what the white officers was doing? They take a hair comb. We had radios at that time. And they take the hair comb and run it back and forth against the speaker part. And they call for a 1013. That's an officer need assistance. And the white officers was taking that comb that they couldn't find the location. This is online. You know, we got a system here. So what I'm telling you, you don't have to believe me standing here. Read it for yourself. 113 precinct in Queens. And those officers was pat on the back and told them don't do it no more and transfer them to another precinct. So we got to start, if we stop the little things, these big things won't happen. These were juveniles, should have never been in a cell. It's in the penal law. You understand me? These are law, and our children don't know that. I have a grandson, 18 and 16. He's in college. The other one is in high school. All you have to do is answer these questions. What is your name and how old are you? That's it. Your next statement is, I want a lawyer. Stand by it. These kids here was railroaded so bad, I hurt, because I was on the job when they was there. And it hurt me because they should have never been treated like an adult. You could give me a package of a juvenile arrest right now and I could do it with my eyes closed. Tell me what line you on and I'll tell you what goes in the box. These kids here should have never, ever been in a cell. Never been mixed with an adult. You had no proof. All you know is that this is what was said. And these kids was like treated like an adult, like a full 21-year-old. And it's so sad. And I take my hat off. I love him. He knows it, right? You understand what I'm saying? So just, and when you seeing stuff on the street, you guys can help out. Stand back. He's getting locked up. Stand back. You got phones. Every phone have a camera on it. Take pictures. Take pictures of the car. Every car, we go out, every car is labeled. The plates, what officer is in that car. You could do it. Don't harass, don't mouth off. Just take pictures, step back. Click, click. Take pictures. You understand? Take movie things. They can't hide from us no more. You understand? This will never happen if you guys work with it. Will never happen. Take pictures. Just stand back and relax. Don't mouth off, oh, I can do what I want. I can stand here. It's a free country. It's not helping. It's hurting, okay? Because then they lock you up for obstructing, okay? So, guys, just remember that. What these guys went through, if you saw the document, I mean, like, I'm like, you know, and missing some of the important part. Let me rewind. Please, just stand back. We are the voices, and we can make changes. Please. Thank you.
Hi, thank you for coming here. I remember watching the documentary and how emotional it was and having to stop and coming back. So I guess my question is, I think as Black people, we have this burden of like saving the world, or as you went through this traumatic experience and coming out, you still feel like it's a responsibility or a burden to save other people or for them to not go through that. So I'll say, how do you balance this sense of responsibility and just living life as like full human beings without constantly having to look over your shoulder or protecting other Black kids so they don't go through that? And my second question would be, sometimes you have to, unfortunately, appeal to the other side so you can have legislations passed. So how do you do that without having to explain your humanity? Because some people might not see you as a full human being, have we seen in the media. So how do you do that and reaching across the table without having to explain your humanity when other people are very dense in how they see you and having the stereotype of who Black people are and what they do in the society?
I mean, for us, it becomes part of just doing the work, right? Here it is that this is something that we didn't want, right? We didn't ask for this. We were 14, 15 years old, trying to enjoy life, trying to just be kids. And then you push into the system and you given these labels, and then you have to grow up fast. And so I think for us, because now as we grow up in the system, we start to shape it, right? And it turns us into fighters. It turns us into activists. We start to question things, right? We go through college, we both get degrees while we're in the system, and so we come back as different people. And it isn't until later on, after exoneration, that you start to see the magnitude, right? Because I never was on bail. So the whole time I was inside. So when I finally come home, to see the magnitude of how big it is, it's like, wow. And at this point, I understand the system because I've been through it, I know what it does, and it gives us this platform that we have to speak. And if you don't do nothing, then you're just doing you're doing the injustice. You're doing it, you're not fulfilling your role. And so even though we didn't call for the platform, we were given the platform. And so we had to accept it because that's all we knew, right? So now when we get exonerated and we're thinking that it's over, it's not over. We go through like an 11-year battle with the city, right? And like I said, this is a no-pay case, right? Linda Festine shows up to court with 20 interns to apply intimidation tactics, right? And so the police are saying we're still guilty of something, right? There's articles still being written about us until 2012 saying that we're guilty of something. So this is a system that's fighting us full head on. And so we don't have the time to have a childhood. We don't have the time to try to catch up, because when we come out of prison and we're exonerated, we go right into another battle. And it's an 11-year battle. And then after you're done with the 11-year battle, then you have George Floyd, you have all these cases that pop up. And now people look at you, as a voice. So there's never really a time for us to rest. There's never really a time for us to decompress. It doesn't happen. And our families go through the same thing because now they're sisters of. And so, in 1989, they were considered, they had these horrible labels also. They received death threats. So they went through their own trauma, and so that stuff never heals. You got to just deal with it. But we always push it to the back because there's something bigger at stake, and that's our children. And then now we all have kids. So for me, the main focus becomes Malia. Like, I have to fight for her. That's it. And then everything else doesn't matter, right? It's just about her being successful. And get rich and die trying, right? So it's like by any means necessary. And so this is who I have. This is my child. So at the end of the day, I have to do everything I can to make sure that she's successful, right? And so there's still things that we deal with. There's still, trauma. We lost a whole childhood. And now we're what, 40?
Something.
You do the math.
Yeah. But it never stops, right? Trump gets into office. Then there's debate about Trump with us, and then Biden comes in, and so it just never stops for us. It's some way, somehow that our case has just been that case that America, New York City just wants to forget. But Black and Latino people, we cannot forget it because it's just that important to us, right? Because it establishes what happened to our youth after 1989. The 1994 crime bill comes in. The term super predator was used against us in 1989, leading up to 1994. So we become the poster children for mass incarceration. at a juvenile level, right? You can house a man at $40,000 a year, right? Let's just say, but a juvenile is $200,000. So the money becomes more in housing the juveniles. And who's the perfect kids that you can use to say that we're heartless, we're committing more heinous crimes, right? And we don't care who we do it to. So you labeled a whole generation of kids, and then you decide to lock them up. And everybody just stand back and say, yeah, because they're crazy now. They're wilding. Lock them all up. Yeah.
You know, we had to develop thick skin. And as time went on, we couldn't care less what people thought because we knew the truth. And when it finally was released to the world that we told you so, you know, that felt good. And I also, I have 2 daughters of my own. When I look at them and I realize that I have to keep on. And when I see people, young or old, that I'm inspiring them, I'm like, yeah, I'm doing something good, you know, and we have to pay it forward. We're not supposed to be here.
Yeah.
They thought.
Yeah.
And to be here and to fight to be here is something that we should celebrate. You know, I'm a humble person, everybody knows, but because of everything that's been happening over the years, it has pushed me out my comfort zone to start speaking and raising awareness. I was just in a position like Antron McCray, my brother, which you don't even see him. And then when they see us, it was like a narrator voice and in the doc. Actually, it was Raymond and Yusuf before myself that said, Kev, you need to show your face more. You need to come out to the project more. You know, and let's get involved. And from that, I'm so glad that I embraced that because now I see that we have a voice and people are seeing us and hearing us.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's so good seeing you guys. You know, I've been on this case since 1989. And Kev and Raymond, talk a little bit about the time when you first came home and before the exoneration. Talk a little bit about having to report as a sexual predator during those days.
Yeah.
And secondly, talk about the sad irony as to Mateus Reyes still out there committing crimes while they're still trying to pin the crime on you guys. The sad irony as he was still doing the same MO all along. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I guess I'll take the first part.
Yeah.
Wow, I remember, yes, Raymond was never bailed out, and I was bailed out in 1997, and I had to report, actually not too close, on 40th Street as a sex offender. Level 3, to be exact, and level 3 is the worst of you're a sexual predator. And you're talking about dehumanizing? Step in there and you had to tell who you are, where you live. You can't go to a certain school. Now, I grew up in a household of women. I have 2 daughters right now. So it was harsh to go through that. And it was set for us to fail, you know, but we surpassed that. And it was, let me see, in 1997, I went to up until 2000. And then after that, you have to be a sexual offender for 10 more years after that, you know.
Yeah.
So
You gotta
it
fill
was
out
a long
paperwork
process that
every
we had to
90
go
days.
through. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Still remember.
it was dehumanizing to go there and they call you and you go to a certain room. And on the room it says Central Robbery Unit, but it was really a sex offender unit. And going there and knowing that you're innocent and you have to report, even though you're innocent of the crime. So that was very hard to go through all those years. And they thought, quite frankly, that we would give up. Myself and Yusuf Salam was actually in the same sexual predators class, documenting when they see us. And it was just crazy that we had to go there. And I remember me and Yusuf used to look at each other. I'm like, what are we doing here? And to add insult to injury, we had to pay for it. Yeah, so coming out in 1997, when you don't have any means financial,
Yeah.
that's one setback that they try to keep you to go back in prison. Because at that time, the recidivism rate was very high. So it was all these different tactics they had to set us up. So that time was crucial, but we stayed out.
Yeah. And then with Mateus Reyes, he was known as the East Side rapist, the East Side slasher, right? And so he worked at a bodega on 102nd Street, which is right around the corner from the 23rd Precinct. So a lot of the police officers knew him when they used to go in there and get coffee and donuts and stuff. And so the night that he commits the jogger case, and this is all him. This is part of his testimony. As he's leaving the scene of the crime, they stop him because they're looking for juveniles, and they ask him, has he seen any juveniles? And he tells them no. And he says that if they'd have looked at his pants, they'd have saw the blood on his pants. This was a guy who, when you look at the old Law and Order episodes, and they show in the opening credits, they show the article that says East Side rapist captured. That's him. That's what they're talking about.
Yep.
And so he over I believe 1989, over the course of the summer, he commits 4 rapes and a murder and rape of a pregnant woman, right? And so he doesn't get caught by the police. He goes in, he sneaks into this building, high-rise building. He assaults this woman, and upon leaving, she runs downstairs and she tells the doorman, and that's who actually grabs him, right? So police never arrested him. The workers in the building arrested him. But there was this one cop who was looking for a guy because there was a rape, attempted rape, 2 days before the Central Park jogger case in Central Park. And the guy they was looking for had stitches because that's how the woman ID'd him. And so there was a detective who was looking for Mateus Reyes because he got his name, right? But they never put it together. And this was the same Homicide North Detective Squad who was working our case, they was working his case. And so, so now you fast forward 13 years, 14 years later, and he sees Corey Wise walking in the yard, and he says, wow, that guy's still here for this case that I committed. And so he goes and he has this conversation with Corey, but he doesn't tell him that he did it. He just has this conversation. They talk about religion, spirituality, and finding Christ. And what people don't know is that in 1989, they had a fight because they was in the same housing unit over the TV, right? And so Corey has a scar that came from Mateus Reyes. And so now he sees him 14 years later, and they have this conversation. And it's due to the conversation that he has with Corey that Mateus is compelled to say something. And so for the next 8 months, this guy has to continuously tell his story. Not to prove that we're innocent, he has to tell his story to prove to them that he's guilty, right? They don't want to believe him. And so they conduct this 8-month-long investigation. There's a document online that you can look that's from the DA's office, right? District Attorney by the name of Nancy Ryan. And if you read, it's about 51 pages long. And Mateus Reyes, he's telling the story, and they don't want to believe him. They want to make him the sixth man, right? And they know that his MO, his MO is that all his victims are bound and gagged, and all their injuries around the face and the head so that they can't ID him. And so now, when it comes to the jogger, he gives them specifics that they didn't even know. Like he took her keys, he tried to get the address to her apartment, stuff like that. And then when you test the DNA samples, because there's one sample, but it's 2 markers. And so one is on the sock, and then one is inside the victim. And both of those is his. So he's the sole person who committed this crime, nobody else. The drag mark says that it's about 12 inches, which says that only one person dragged this woman. And so we go through this 8-month investigation, almost a year, where the police is trying to connect him to us. And so Mateus Reyes finally gets to his deposition, which lasts about 3 days long. And by this time, he's so tired of telling his story that he says, listen, if you guys don't get it now, that's it. I'm done. I'm leaving. I'm going back to my prison. I'm not going to say nothing else. And so, and then here came the kicker. The kicker was that he showed them how real he was, that he gave them 4 unsolved cases. And that's in the document. We ain't got to lie about this stuff. It's there, right? And so that's when it becomes real. Because now, once we get a hold of it and we get the affidavit, now it's out. And then now the people just start doing their research and they start to see it. And so the whole time, the police department is sitting here trying to connect Reyes to us. And so during the deposition that we conducted over 100 depositions with the police officers, we find out that they keep a little book, right? The Homicide North Detective Squad of back then is the same Homicide North Detective Squad that they try to give us now to help us in the reinvestigation, right? This is just the younger generation, but there are 2 detectives that are still on there from the old one. So these are the guys who are supposedly spearheading the investigation of trying to help. We get their booklet, and in their booklet there's 3 points, and one of it's connect the boys to Reyes, right? This is Reyes, so we even get emails from Robin Morgenthau himself to the police department saying, you guys are dirty. You guys are trying to connect Reyes to these boys so you cannot talk to them. The police department wanted to file a lawsuit against the district attorney's office because they wouldn't give them access to Reyes. This is all factual. This is in the document.
Oh, yeah.
We have it.
Yeah.
And this is the reason why they wanted to drag us out for so long, and they didn't want to take us to trial because the exposure would have just been so much. I mean, and so here was Reyes who was trying to prove his guilt, right? And the man, I mean, this is 30 plus years later. He has 33 1/3 to life. He's up for parole. The man has been married. People don't know that. The man has been married since he's been in prison. This is crazy. And this is a serial rapist, right? Who had to prove that he committed the Central Park jogging case, not the other way around.
Yeah. And in court. When she came to, she came to testify.
That's it.
And it's funny you said that you would think, right? We were praying that she remember, that she has a conscience, because she could be like, those are not the guys.
Right.
But she couldn't remember. And that was like a blow to us, because they say, oh, see? Right. They're part of that. And we was hoping that she gained consciousness when she came to court, And something really quick. During that time when the investigators knew about Reyes, because at one time I was out of prison, they came to my house. And my mom, but she still, my mom is my mom. She still was naive to the fact. At this time, I was like, don't open the door for anybody, Mom. I was in the bathroom, and my mother opened the door, and it was the investigators. And they said there was a fire where I live at. And they said, we wanted to show you pictures. These investigators, very sneaky, they slipped in pictures of Reyes to see if I recognized him.
Yep.
And I looked, and I said, I don't know anybody here. They was trying to connect us, like you said, connect them to Reyes by any means necessary.
Yeah.
So they knew about Reyes. They were just trying to connect the dots somehow.
Yeah. And that was one of the reasons why we fought so hard for the database, because we was always saying, if you establish a DNA database and then you run the marker, you're gonna find out that we're innocent. But nobody wanted to run that marker, right? It was just like, oh yeah, we're gonna create this database and we're gonna arrest people who are coming out of prison for old crimes. They didn't anticipate what's gonna happen when somebody's innocent. What are we gonna do about that? Yeah.
We have a question up here, too.
Oh, yes. She's been waiting patiently.
Yes.
So you mentioned a battle after having been exonerated, and I was curious if you could walk through the things that kind of go under the radar that aren't really seen, and the things that you still face on a daily basis in your personal lives related to the case, and how you emotionally cope with that.
Yeah, and I think for me, that's the part, right? Because you get through exoneration, we fight on numerous bills, right, with the Innocence Project, right? We partner with Rebecca, fight for numerous bills. But then there's this thing personally, right? The trauma. Like, we lost a whole childhood. What do you do, right? And how do you deal with that? And then there's life, right? Because we're in our 40s, we have families, so now you have to be an adult, but you still battle with this kid sometimes that's inside. So you just got to learn how to balance and how to take life one day at a time. It becomes part of like I learned, because I'm recently divorced. And so for me, you had to go back and look at that and then try to grow from it. Like, what do I do? Well, maybe next time take your time, right? Mm-hmm. It's not hard. When when it's about you, nobody can tell you how to move in your process. Nobody can give you a timetable. Nobody can give you a time limit on it. It's up to you, and it's when you heal and how you heal. And so for me, you just take it one day at a time, and you just cope. And as time goes on, you will heal eventually. You know what I'm saying? And so for me, that's what it is. Because this is just a constant battle that we've been through, and it never lets up. And I'm like, what happens the day that there's like no injustice? What do we do? Like, we'll be sitting here looking at each other like, so, and it's unfortunate, right? Like, we would love to have that problem. We would, but it's personally, for me, that becomes the new battle. You know, when you got to deal with the internal trauma and the demons that you deal with within yourself, and how do you cope with it? Because nobody cares. Yeah. Your bills still got to be paid. You still got to be at work on time. The kids don't care, right? When Jenny come in the room, she don't want to hear that. My time, Daddy, let's go. Yeah. You know, so again, you have to play the back fiddle and just figure it out.
Yeah, you know, it's a healing process, you know. One thing I know as men, and especially men of color, we struggle with letting our emotions out. You know, mental health is serious.
Yeah.
You know, PTSD is serious. It's a thing. It's real. And I think I could speak for my brothers that we all go through that.
Yeah.
You know, but you said one day at a time, we just got to keep fighting the fight. And when I look at my kids, that's what keeps me motivated. And look at my family, the people that's looking up to us. You know, that's letting people know that we have an important piece in this fight. You know, so, but it's real to go through. But we have to just keep staying strong and just keep battling. Because, like I said, people see us and they think that. I appreciate it that people look up to us like that. But we are human. You know, we all are the same, just like you. But we do take the responsibility of fighting the fight. And unfortunately, we've been used as scapegoats. But it's for the greater good of the generation behind us to keep pushing it forward. So if it's on that level, I'll take it. As long as the others behind us will learn from what we've been through.
Yeah.
So are there other questions? Or?
Yeah, there's.
Oh, there are.
Yeah, there's questions.
I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit about how do you process through the process of false confession, having incriminated yourselves and then not only yourselves, but your friends. You guys seem to have stayed close, you know, throughout the process, throughout and after. And then also learning how, not only for yourself, but learning that your friends also had a part in incriminating you. And how did you deal with that as a group?
I know for me, because I didn't know Kevin. I didn't know Yusuf. I didn't know Corey. I didn't know Antron, right? So Kevin is the picture that's put in front of me, because what I didn't know was that before that he got tackled by the police officer and he got hit in the face with the helmet. So when they bring me the photo, and this is 15 to 30 hours of interrogation, and I'm at a point of helplessness, right? And so when he puts the photo in front of me, and he says, "Do you know him?" And I go, "No." And he says, "Well, this is Kevin." And he says, "Well, we know he's going to jail, but I don't want you to go to jail. So I need your help. I need something on him." And then he sat back. And as a 14-year-old kid, my mind is racing. I don't know what to do, so I just lie. Kevin did it. But what did he do, Raymond? I don't know. So now he has to walk me through the steps. I don't know what a rape is supposed to look like. So he has to sit there and tell me, well, we know Kevin has the scratch, so he must have did something. All right, well, he raped a woman. Well, what about Antron? Well, I don't know. Where do I place him? Come on, Raymond, you got to give me something. They in the other precincts. They talking about you. I don't want you to go to jail. You got to help me. And so he helps me put together the story. That's why it's only Kevin, Antron, and Stephen Lopez in my statement, because these are the names that he gave me. And then at the end, he says, okay, and he knows these are seasoned veteran detectives. Let's get that straight. 20 plus years on the force, the elite of the police department. We're 14 and 15-year-old kids who never been arrested before. The unknown, right? And so he says, in order for it to be believable, you have to be there. You have to place yourself at the scene. Now, What's your role? So I pick what I think is minimum. Oh, yeah, I reach over and I grab her breast. But there's no mud on my pants, right? And so he takes it. He takes it and he writes it down. And at this point, he says, you're doing good. You're going to go home. I just need your help, right? And so, but let me back up before that. Before we actually get to that point, I'm going through the good cop, bad cop scenario within that 15 to 30 hours, right? It gets to a point that Arroyo bangs on the table and he says, I'm tired of this shit, and he reaches over like he's gonna grab me. And at that moment, I'm thinking, I'm dead, I'm not gonna make it out the precinct. And in the same instance, another detective by the name of Detective Hardigan jumps in and stops him. What are you doing? You crazy? Get out the room. You don't talk to him like that. And at that point, I feel like he saved my life. So this is the setup, right? So now I trust him because I feel like he saved me and he's trying to help me. And then he tells me he's trying to help me, right? And so now when you fast forward and you get to the end part and he says, well, you have to, in order to be believable, you have to be there. So I place myself there. And then he says, okay, now technically it's illegal. My parent is not in the room. It's just me and him. The statement is 2.5 pages long. But he has me hook, line, and sinker and think I'm going home. So what he tells me, go to the next precinct. I need you to do 2 more things for me. You're going to go to the next precinct. You're going to tell them the same story, and you're going to do a video. Now, my next statement is 5 pages long, right? Because now I get into it. I'm being interviewed by Detective Sheen, who's more of a veteran. And so it becomes 5 pages long, and then it goes to a videotape. By that time, it's done. It's over. And so now, only thing that we don't know this, right? They take our clothing, right? They test it. There's no match to another clothing. They take handprints, footprints, hair samples, blood samples. Nothing matches, right? And so now we're sitting there like, okay, nothing matches. Where do we go from here? And they said, you're still guilty. And everybody bought it. So this is how destructive wrongful confessions become, right? Because what happens is that nobody thought with logic. Everybody just ran on emotion. There's a woman who lost all his blood. We don't know if she's gonna make it. It's almost a homicide case, and it's 5 Black and Latino kids. And then now the media is on it from day one. They're tearing the story apart. So we never got a fair trial. It was already lopsided. The playing field was uneven, right? And so, again, that's why I stated earlier that when you put out the emotional appeal and everybody buys it, then you understand, hey, we got away with it. Mateus got away with the crime, and the system got away with locking us up. Yeah.
So well put. And, I think with that, we're going to wrap. But I just want to really, first of all, acknowledge Kevin and Raymond. We are so, so grateful for you to share again. I mean, I think every time you have to share, you're going through it again. So we just really want to thank you so much for your time and just everything that you're doing to, in Kevin's words, fight the fight. And to help us fight the fight, please visit our website at www.innocenceproject.org to learn about a range of policy campaigns happening here in New York State and around the country. And also follow us on our social media channels, Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn, the whole thing. So thank you so, so much for having us.